Good morning and thank you for joining us this morning. We have a fascinating subject to talk about: environmental illness. What would you do if virtually everything made you sick? Perfume, deodorant, glue in the furniture in your house, chemicals in the carpet. It happened to one of my guests today, and what he did is turn his personal health problem into an opportunity to help other people. Alan Bell founded the Environmental Health Foundation to try to find treatments for environmentally related diseases. Now, Alan is joining us today from his home here in Tucson. He's too allergic to too many of the things here at Channel 4 to come here to the studio. But joining me in the studio is Dr. Iris Bell. Dr. Bell is not related to Alan, but she's on the Scientific Advisory Board for his Environmental Health Foundation. Dr. Bell is an assistant professor of psychiatry and psychology at the University of Arizona. She's written articles and is doing research on environmental illness. Alan, to get us started this morning, tell us what happened to you. Just a couple of years ago, you were a powerful Florida, an attorney. You were an athlete living what you call the American dream. What happened?
Well, I was living the American dream by most people's standards. I was happily married, new baby girl, new house, new cars, ski vacations, promising career as a trial attorney. Sandy, I was formerly assistant state attorney for the state of Florida in the organized crime unit, prosecuting various organized crimes, including clubbing, cartel, drug rings, murder, you name it. Well, the story goes, I went out into private practice, and the building that I was in, where my law practice was located, underwent a major renovation. It just so happened that at the time my law building was undergoing renovation, my home was as well. Sandy, I don't know if you're familiar with what happens when things are renovated, but you introduce glues, adhesives, other toxic materials in an indoor environment which could make people who are susceptible to these type of things ill. This illness in these indoor atmospheres are otherwise known as sick building syndrome. That's precisely what happened to me. I continued going into the building. My health deteriorated to the point where I became totally disabled. My immune system became damaged. And what ultimately happened is I became sensitive to many, many things in the environment. That's the reason why I'm not in your TV studio today.
To look at you, you look really healthy. You're a handsome young man. How do you feel? How does perfume or deodorant or carpet or things like that make you feel?
Well, it depends on the particular person. As far as I'm concerned, it affects me in the respiratory system. They call it reactive airway disease. It could affect me digestively with severe fatigue and other system organs and other systems in the body. I have to point out that what's happening with me is essentially what's happening to many of our Gulf War veterans who have returned home from Operation Desert Storm.
I want to ask Dr. Iris Bell about that. How common or unusual is what's happened to Alan?
That's a very difficult question right now, surprisingly, with the state of our research. It is apparently increasingly common in our society for people to start having problems from the chemicals around them. There's actually been very limited work to find out in the general community how many people have the problem. In some of my surveys here in the greater Tucson area, what I found is that about 1% of the college students or less, or about 4% of the elderly, and neither of these groups are in the workforce, tend to have very, very severe problems that might actually lead to disability of some type. There's a much broader group of people in the general community that have some degree of difficulty from chemical odors, but don't actually reach the point of disability or severe impairment.
Well, I had an opportunity to do a news story with Alan not too long ago, and after I did that, a lot of people called and said that they had very similar problems.
That's right. Actually, in some of our survey work, we found that over half of the people that we survey say at least one chemical causes them significant difficulties. The list that we've used in some of our work involves things like new carpet and perfume, pesticide, paint, and car exhaust. But the list is endless. You can have newsprint and disinfectants, and as you mentioned at the beginning, there's a wide range of substances that can cause difficulties for particular individuals.
Alan, I know that when I've talked to you in the past, you've got a whole bunch of statistics at your fingertips.
Yes, I do.
About how common you think this problem is. Rattle some of them off for us, would you?
Well, with respect to indoor air pollution, the EPA estimates that 75 million Americans risk illness from indoor air pollution. Also, they estimate that indoor air pollution is the 4th leading cause of cancer in the United States. Recent statistics that have come out from the United States government indicates that most cases of cancer are non-smoking related. And if you look at this indoor air pollution statistic and couple it with that other fact, we've got a big problem inside our buildings. The EPA also states that between 800,000 and 1.2 million commercial buildings in the United States are categorized as sick. In other words, people or occupants in those buildings are experiencing sick building syndrome in 1.2 million commercial buildings in the United States. And we're not talking about homes or other buildings. We're just talking about commercial buildings. If you want to talk about outdoor air pollution, Harvard Medical School just came out with a study that concluded 1 of every 20 city deaths in a typical large American city are linked to outdoor air pollution. Those numbers are staggering, they're frightening, and little is being done about it up until this point. If you want to talk about toxic waste dumps, the EPA estimates that 41 million Americans live within 4 miles of a toxic waste dump. You want to talk about childhood asthma. Childhood asthma has increased 200%. In other words, it's doubled, Sandy, in the last 2 decades. The American Cancer Society estimates that 44.3% increase in cancer per 100,000 people in the United States in the last 35 years. Now, these statistics are mind-boggling. The Gulf War veterans, there's 20,000 Gulf War veterans now that have registered after being exposed to who knows what in the Gulf War. My question to you, Sandy, is this. With all the billions of dollars that are being pumped into the medical community in research and treatment and care, why is the incidence of chronic disease in many categories going through the roof? That's a question that we need to address, and that's one of the main reasons why the Environmental Health Foundation has been started.
Well, you think it's because of environmental problems. Dr. Bell, do you agree?
Well, I certainly think it can be a factor. So many of these health problems are incredibly complicated. I think a great deal of our recent medical research has been focusing on genetic flaws that various people have that may make them particularly vulnerable to a problem. And we've lost sight of the fact that many people who have the genetic risk factors don't become ill because the environment has not activated the problem. So I think it's really adding back a balance in the research world to start looking at both sides of the equation at this point.
Why is it that it's only recently, in the last few years, that we've seen, may not be the right verb, but at least talked about environmental illnesses?
Again, a number of different reasons. One of them being that the chemical production within at least our country has gone up a great deal in the last 40 to 50 years, and that we are among the first generations that really grew up using chemicals as an everyday part of our lives. There was an interesting story I once read about older generations remembering the smells of childhood as being things like hay from the farm and so on, and our generation, starting in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and so on, we remember some of the chemical smells that are a part of our everyday lives. So I think there's been a shift that way in terms of the reliance that we have on chemicals. And I'd like to hasten that I don't see chemicals as bad, just as a general substance or a general area, but you have to take a look at the issues and the way in which they're used. One of the other things that's a potential issue for us is there may be certain chemicals that are much worse than others, and we really haven't put any effort into identifying which ones those are. We begin to identify certain pesticides or other chemicals that might cause cancer years after they're introduced into common consumption, and then we get rid of those, but then we have others coming in. And one of the important things from my point of view as a psychiatrist is that we really haven't looked at behavioral problems very much. We start paying more and more attention in the last few years to behavioral problems, but we begin to see a tremendous increase in some of them, and we begin to see some of the potential links between some chemicals and behavioral or emotional problems that we hadn't thought of before. And I think that, again, is another issue that relates to people's feelings about problems in the brain and brain function.
Well, Alan, you and I talked once, and you told me that one of the reasons you think that we're just seeing environmental illness as a growing problem now goes back to the Arab oil embargo. All of a sudden, there was a great big emphasis in this country on energy conservation. So basically, we sealed up buildings real tight so the air inside didn't get out and outside air didn't get in to cut down on energy costs, and now we've got sick buildings.
That's correct. I think that's just one component of the sudden increase in this problem. I would have to concur with Dr. Bell that we are the first generation in the history of thousands of years of human existence that has been bombarded with chemicals since birth. If you look at our way of life compared to just our parents' generation on how they grew up, it's just mind-boggling what you see. Some examples is the indoor environment that you discussed in the 1970s because of this Arab oil embargo. In order to save energy, what we did is we sealed up the buildings. And instead of bringing in fresh air like we've done in generations in the past, we've sealed the windows, sealed the doors, and recirculated the old air because it's a lot cheaper to recirculate cool air in a building than bring in hot air and have to heat it once it gets in the house. So what you've got is you've got a situation that's artificial where you've got a lot of people in buildings, offices, homes, wherever, breathing recirculated air. Now, inside the indoor environment, you've got carpeting, you've got paint, you've got glues, you've got computers, you've got all different types of things that are outgassing toxins that people are breathing. That's one of the main problems with the indoor air pollution, but it goes far beyond that. If you look at outdoor air pollution, when my parents grew up, they grew up in an age of horse and buggy, where there was no large amounts of air pollution due to automobile exhaust that we see now. So we've got a different situation. We've got pollution in Phoenix, pollution in Los Angeles that our parents' generation didn't experience. If you look at the clothes on our back, polyesters, nylons, things like that that are made from petrochemicals. Our parents grew up in a generation where they wore cottons, linens, natural types of fibers, pesticides. At the end of World War II, the Germans had all these stockpiles of nerve gas, and they tried to reconvert it into something more lucrative. And they discovered that if you dilute this nerve gas and spray it on our crops, that it would kill the bugs. And if you spray it in the homes, it would kill the bugs. That has been the beginning of pesticides and the beginning of a new era as we know it.
Okay, I want to take a quick commercial break here, and then we'll be right back. You're a man who does not feel sorry for himself. You're taking your personal health problem and trying to turn it into an opportunity to help other people by setting up this foundation. We're going to talk about that when we come back, so stay with us.
Great.
Welcome back. Alan, let's jump back out to you at your house. Tell us about this nonprofit foundation that you set up and what you hope to do with it.
Well, if it's okay with you, Sandy, I'd like to give you a little background and why we started it up. There's a link there between what happened to me and the foundation. What basically happened is, in my quest to get better, I began talking to doctors and scientists all over the country in order to find medical help for me. And what I discovered is medical science knew very little about environmentally related disease. I learned that that was true because there's been very little research done in this area. So what we then did is my brother and I, Robert, who is the co-founder and co-chairman of this organization, began looking for a nonprofit organization similar to the March of Dimes, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And the purpose of our search was to find an organization that focused on funding medical research of environmentally related diseases so we can donate money to them for research. And we were shocked to learn that no such organization existed. With all the environmental organizations out there to save the whales and the birds and the trees, none that focuses on treatment and cures of environmentally related disease for the humans.
Dr. Iris Bell is one of the members of your scientific advisory board.
Yes.
It's really made up. Alan, I want to talk to Iris here for a second. A lot of prominent people are on this board.
Yes.
Why did you join? I mean, it's such a new area. There's no foundation like this anywhere else in the country. So that makes it new, which probably makes it controversial. Why did you join this?
Well, this is an area of controversy that I've been doing research in for a number of years at various points in my career. And I felt that this was a tremendous breakthrough to have a bona fide organization that genuinely wanted to fund unbiased research in areas, not just specifically in the environmental illness problems we've been talking about, but again in the broader sense on environmentally related cancers and environmentally related diseases in all parts of the body and various systems. And I felt it was an opportunity to make some breakthroughs in this field that have not been possible before because of a lack of funding.
Now, Alan said that one of the things, well, actually, the foundation has two goals: to educate people about the problems and also to raise money for research.
Yes.
The foundation has recently given its first research grant. You got it.
Yes.
You didn't vote to give it to yourself. You
No, I didn't.
removed yourself from the advisory board
Right.
when it decided who to give this research grant, but it did go to you.
Yes.
About $45,000.
Yes.
What are you going to do with it?
Well, as I indicated a few minutes ago, our area of interest is the sensitive nervous system, the concern that the nervous system is one of the parts of the body that gets affected first when the environment starts getting into the body and causing abnormalities. And that they're very subtle changes that we can pick up now with some of the kinds of tools we have, such as specialized computerized brainwaves, such as very sophisticated tests for cognitive function. That's memory and learning and attentional kinds of functions. And those kinds of things can be affected in very subtle ways, particularly in sick building syndrome and in some of these other things. But there's a tremendous controversy about whether that happens, and if it does, is it actually due to chemicals or some other factors, be they psychological or something else. And so our work is going to be a controlled, double-blind kind of study in which we will give people very, very low levels of chemical exposures to very common substances that are found in indoor air, to the point where they, most of the time, will not be aware as to whether or not they're actually getting a chemical or just distilled water or an empty bottle. But during the study, we will then be studying their brainwaves and their ability to concentrate on a complicated task. We'll also be interviewing them at great length to make sure we understand more about their medical past history, their psychiatric past history, and really documenting the entire health history of that individual as we study them.
Some people believe that environmental illnesses are a mental problem, not a physical problem.
It's a very complicated and controversial area in itself. There is some evidence in previous studies that have been done that there's an increased rate of some psychiatric problems, at least after the onset of the illness. But of course that could be coming from the tremendous psychological burden that a person has when they're chronically ill and society doesn't even accept them or make provision for them. There's another more interesting possibility, which is that the chemicals themselves cause the brain to malfunction. And that's the hypothesis that we already have some preliminary evidence that may be going on. I don't know that this is necessarily the entire explanation. In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's a very complicated mixture of biological effects of the chemicals and psychological responses to the overall environment in which the chemicals are received.
You are looking for some women.
Yes, we are.
You're looking for women to help you with this research project.
Yes.
Who do you want? And we're going to throw up a phone number here
Great.
at the end of the program where people can call.
Excellent. We're going to be starting a new research project funded by the Environmental Health Foundation in which women between the ages of 30 and 50, some of whom feel that they do have some health problems related to environmental chemicals and some of whom feel they do not, will be invited to participate in this study. It'll be essentially a 3-session study, so we'll be asking people to do a lot in terms of having standard medical history and physical exam, a psychiatric interview, filling out questionnaires, but then we'll have 2 laboratory sessions in a special house that we have that is air filtered and prepared so that we can give these chemical exposures safely and record the effects on the brainwaves as we do it.
Okay, and basically people can call your office and
Yes.
volunteer for the project.
Yes, the number that you're going to show has an answering machine connected to it 24 hours a day, and we'll be happy to call people back and ask them a few basic questions to see whether they qualify for the study.
Okay, if you're interested, get your pencil ready. We'll give you that phone number at the end of the program. Alan, back to you.
Okay.
What do you have to say to people who say it's all in the mind and it's not physical?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that we're talking about a broad spectrum of different diseases here. We're talking about traditional diseases that have already been linked, uncontroverted, cancer, autoimmune syndromes. The documentation is there, the research is there. So when we say environmentally related disease, we're talking about a whole broad spectrum of diseases. The best way I might be able to illustrate this point is this. If you take 100 people and you put them in a room and you gas them with chemicals, toxic chemicals that are known to cause various types of disease, and you follow these 100 people over the next 20 or 30 years, you're going to find a whole broad spectrum of different diseases manifesting that could be related to that initial insult. And depending on each individual's biochemical fingerprint, in other words, the missing or the weakest link in their body, that could be the disease that they come up with 10 to 20 years later. My particular problem is just one particular illness. The Environmental Health Foundation is not addressing that particular illness per se, but a whole broad spectrum of illnesses that are known to be related to environmental toxins.
One of the reasons you set up this foundation was for your daughter. You have a young daughter who doesn't have the kind of problem you've got, but you're concerned that this problem is going to get bigger with future generations.
Absolutely. I feel very, very strongly about that. And that goes to my belief that because we're the first generation in the history of mankind that's experiencing this problem. You could even see in my daughter's generation, my little daughter Ashley, who's 6 years old, you're seeing childhood asthma increasing 200% in the last 20 years. You're looking at autoimmune syndromes, lupus, scleroderma, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, all these things are rising. It's not a coincidence. It's plain to see. It's right under our noses.
Let's talk some more about the foundation and how you intend to do your fundraising. You intend to set up a series of chapters around the country. First one here in Tucson. Had a meeting here this week, in fact, to get started on the process of doing education and fundraising.
That's right. I think it's important to at least distinguish this foundation, which is the only one of its kind in the United States, from other types of nonprofits. Now, there's a lot of environmental organizations out there that are there to preserve and protect the environment, and they're doing a good thing, but they're not doing what the Environmental Health Foundation is doing. And there's a lot of nonprofit health organizations out there that are focusing on separate and distinct diseases, such as American Cancer, American Heart, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and etc. But there's nobody out there, up until this point in time, that's focusing on how many of these different chronic diseases are interrelated to common environmental factors. So what we're doing now is we've put together a scientific advisory board of top, prominent, cream-of-the-crop scientists throughout the United States, representing major universities and teaching hospitals throughout the country. And we're in the process now of building a prominent board of directors. Simultaneously, we've got a national president, Joseph Zarnicki, who was a top executive with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, who is now spearheading our efforts in opening up chapters throughout the United States. This is our national headquarters, Tucson, and this is where our first chapter is opening up. We currently have plans to open up a chapter in Phoenix, Arizona, California, Florida, and other parts of the country. The type of activities that these local organizations or chapters will do will be something very similar to other nonprofits like March of Dimes or Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Grassroots efforts, concerts, door-to-door, whatever it takes to harness grassroots. But simultaneously with that, we're looking at corporate America, top executives who could really go to bat and bring in big dollars for medical research at universities across the country.
Some people would say that's extremely ambitious.
It's something that needs to be done. It's something whose time has come. It's fulfilling a big void. It's answering a great need. And the activities at the foundation up until this point in time are just spiraling. And there couldn't be enough interest. We can't keep up with the growth.
Dr. Belk, it's awfully ambitious. And Alan works at it, I know, many, many hours a day out of his home. Can all this be done?
Oh, I think so, definitely. I think that, as he said, the time is right, and because of that, there are many, many people who are joining the effort from all walks of life, not just people who are personally affected by an environmentally related illness, but also people who have relatives or friends or simply feel that it's time to take a look at these kinds of issues in this kind of way. So I think he definitely can succeed.
He mentioned the veterans who came home from Desert Storm,
yes,
who've had environmental problems. Does that help focus some attention on this? I know Congress has been talking about their dilemma.
I think, unfortunately for the veterans, this particular problem may be one of the breakthrough events of this field at this point. as we've been indicating, the particular problem of environmental illness is so controversial that until it affected people that we wouldn't usually expect to develop this problem, there wasn't as much attention given to it within this particular national community. And unfortunately for the veterans, they have been the harbingers of the problem. They're the ones that are showing up with the difficulty that men don't usually get, and certainly not healthy men who can participate in the military. So it's a great concern as to whether there was anything involved in the chemical exposures that have caused this problem, and that in itself is a major controversy right now.
Okay, Alan, we just got about a minute left. You want to wrap it up for us here tonight?
Let me just follow up on this last thought. Corporate America has expressed a significant interest in our organization because we're not out to close their smokestacks. We're out to increase corporate profits, increase productivity, lower employee absenteeism, lower health care costs, lower court liability and tort litigation. And because of all these things, you've got corporate America, you've got the grassroots, and you've got everybody working together hand in hand and improving the health of Americans in many, many different ways. We're not talking about one illness. We're talking about everybody in America is in the same boat. Everybody is breathing the same air. Everybody is drinking the same water. And everybody's at risk, everybody's affected, and everybody's joining in to making this thing work.
Okay, it's called the Environmental Health Foundation. Dr. Bell, a few seconds left. Any parting thoughts?
I think we're on the way. I think we've made a very important beginning in this area, both in terms of fundraising and in terms of research. And I think there's going to be tremendous breakthroughs over the next few years.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining me today. Alan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sandy.
And we want to leave you with a couple phone numbers. First of all, we've got a phone number for the Environmental Health Foundation. If you want to call and get some more information, or perhaps join the Tucson chapter or participate in the fundraising, you could call the number there on the screen, the Environmental Health Foundation. We've also got another number for Dr. Iris Bell, who is setting up the research project over at the University of Arizona and needs some women to participate in that. If you're interested, there's the number you can call. Thank you all for joining me today. We'll see you again next week.